To get us started, I'd like to use a little illustration from a child's book, and then I want to use another one from a very, very well-known contemporary singer. So the child's book is Velveteen Rabbit. Have any of you read The Velveteen Rabbit? Read that to your kids? So Marjorie Williams, I'm going to read a little section from the beginning. The rabbit is talking with the skin horse, and the skin horse says, when a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real. Does it hurt? Asked the rabbit. Well, sometimes, said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. But when you are real, you don't mind being hurt. Does it happen all at once or bit by bit? It doesn't happen all at once, said skin horse. You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or have sharp edges or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. Can I hear an amen? But these things don't matter at all because once you are real, you can't ever be ugly. Now, God's love making us real is part of the message of Genesis chapter 3. And that without God's love, in some very important ways, we are not as real as we are meant to be. All right, here's a contemporary musician, Bob Dylan. In the late 1970s, Dylan had, some kind of conversion to Christianity. And by the way, some of his later albums really have a lot of very, very deeply religious, spiritual language in them. So it's always kind of interesting, where's Dylan at with his faith? But in the late 1970s, he wrote a song, You Gotta Serve Somebody. So here's what he said. This is the chorus. But you're gonna have to serve somebody, yes, indeed. You're gonna have to serve somebody. Well, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. And you all know Dylan loves to write, and so he has about 7 stanzas in that song with about 48 different kinds of people covering the entire spectrum. And for every different group, he says you got to serve somebody. And that also is a message of Genesis chapter 3. We do got to serve somebody. We got to worship somebody. We got to love somebody. And therefore, Genesis chapter 3 is all about life and death and love and you and I making choices and sadly, what happens when we make the wrong choices. Genesis chapter 2, verse 17, God says, you will certainly die, talking about eating that tree of knowledge of good and evil. You will certainly die. In chapter 3, the devil comes along and says, you will not certainly die. Completely contradicts God. In Genesis chapter 1, God says, let us make mankind in our image and our likeness, and he did. We were already like God. And then in chapter 3, the devil comes along and says, oh, not enough. You will be like God when you eat from that tree, knowing good and evil. All right, we're going to look at 4 things in Genesis chapter 3 this morning. We're going to look at the fact that there is a source of life and love, God, and what happens when we are disconnected from that source. Then secondly, we're going to look at this declaration of independence where you and I have actually declared our independence from God. And then third, as we're discovering that that's not working, we go running after all kinds of alternative sources for life and love, and the Bible calls them idols. And then we're going to finish up with looking at this whole thing of the love we have lost and how we are regaining it. And one of the things I'm going to do today is you don't always realize that the New Testament writers in particular, so many of the things they say, it's like they're interacting with all that has happened in Genesis chapter 3. We're going to look at a number of things that are said about the nature of love, life, and death in 1 John. So we'll be going through those things as we move through here. First thing, God is the source of life and love. So from 1 John. And so we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love. And whoever lives in love lives in God, and God lives in them. I mean, we all know the story that in Genesis chapter 2, God forms a man from the dust of the ground, and there he is fully formed, but with no life. And then we read, God breathed into Adam the breath of life. Breathe the breath of life. And the word there is breath, it is wind, it is spirit. You can almost say God inspirited into Adam the spirit, the energy, the passion that is needed for Adam to be alive. And Adam became, we read, a living being. Without the Spirit of God, without the life of God in us, I mean, literally in some ways we are just simply not alive. So Genesis 2 is all about God's life in us. But then we come to Genesis chapter 3, and that is a story of you and I being disconnected from this source. You know, the source is a source of power. Power that energizes, motivates, stimulates, moves us. It sustains us, it keeps us, it holds us together. I mean, we all need a power source to do that. And in the beginning, God was the source for Adam and Eve. You know, for all those who live in the southern part of the county, I was on the trail the other day riding down, and by the time I got a little bit south of Glen Rock, I mean, it was a disaster down there. I don't think it's any exaggeration. 100, 150 trees and limbs were down, and they had cleaned it up. It was just, the wreckage was terrible. And I know that many of you had refrigerators that were no longer working. It wasn't your refrigerator's fault. You had air conditioners that stopped working. Nothing wrong with your air conditioner. All kinds of things were not working because they no longer were plugged into the source of power that they needed to do what they were meant to do. Now, maybe you're lucky and you found an alternative source of power called a generator, and it might have helped a little bit, but you know, we understand what happened when we get disconnected from the source of power that we need. You know, Becky and I have some different of the solar-powered lights. We have them along some of our walkways and in our garden. And, you know, on a beautiful day like this, all day long, those solar-powered lights, they soak up the light and the energy, and they store it there. And then when it gets dark, suddenly they come on, and they're just fully lit. But, you know, if we go several days and it's pretty cloudy and overcast and there's not much light, they're just like dim, and they don't seem to stay lit very long because they are dependent for a source. You know, it doesn't matter how well constructed they are, without the source that they need, they simply cannot work. That is what Genesis chapter 3 is all about, and about our connection to that source. Now, the nature of our connection is on our part, it's trust and allegiance. And when I talk about trust in God, our source, I just mean we have confidence in God. We believe in God. And when I talk about allegiance, I mean we have loyalty and commitment. So trust and allegiance, belief, commitment, loyalty, that is how we maintain our source. And yet in Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve stopped believing what God said was true, and they literally reneged on their allegiance to God. That is the message of chapter 3. And in so doing, they were now disconnected from the source. And they experienced a thing called death. Anyone who does not love remains in death. So what happens when we get disconnected from God, the source. We remain in death. I mean, it turned out what God said was true. You will certainly die when you no longer believe and when you no longer maintain allegiance. And what the serpent said was fully false. You will not die. It doesn't matter about trusting God and being aligned to God. It doesn't matter. You're not going to die. And it turned out that God was true. In fact, what the serpent said to Adam and Eve, basically, Jesus is referring back to what the serpent does. The serpent, the enemy, the devil, steal, kill, and destroy. John chapter 10, verse 10, that's what the enemy does. Steals, kills, and destroys. And in chapter 3, that's what the serpent did. Steal, kill, and destroy life, love, laughter, and all good things by disconnecting them from the source. All right, that leads to the second thing then. There was a declaration of independence on the part of Adam and Eve from God, their source. And we're very familiar with declarations of independence. We love ours. We believe ours was fully justified back in the 1700s. But Adam and Eve's, their declaration of independence was an act of rebellion against life and against love. And it was launched by a lie. The lie was, you shall be like God, knowing good and evil. In other words, you're going to be able to decide what is good and true. You're going to be able to call the shots. You're going to be able to make the decisions. What you want, you're going to get. And I tell you what, there is no more constant message in our culture today than you are fully able, self-sufficient, self-determined, do whatever you want. That is just how life works out best for you when you are fully self-sufficient. I want to read a couple words from a book called You Are Not Your Own by Alan Noble. Alan's a college professor. He's worked at a Christian university. He's worked at a secular state university for quite a few years, working with lots of young people. And actually now probably been doing it for 15 years, so he's seen a lot of young people, a couple different generations. And he's looking at their struggles. He's looking at the cultural world that is shaping them. And he winds up talking about what our culture is doing. And let me just read a couple things here. So a society committed to the belief that we are our own, we belong to ourselves, we're going to develop into a hyper-competitive society, one where we all have to fight for survival, validation, meaning, attention, and affirmation. And isn't that exactly what goes on social media every day? We are fighting to get attention. We're fighting to be noticed. We're fighting to get the likes that we want, to validate our existence. You know, today, the message is we can be self-made human agents. We can be the authors of our faith, the masters of our destiny. And so therefore, here's what that looks like. We kick into a life of total work, self-improvement, measurable successes, momentum, movement, adaptation, progress, self-reliance. Everything is being done at full volume, peak efficiency, full speed, all the time. And after a while, it just wears us out. And by the way, for some people, it appears to work for a while. But for a lot of people, it doesn't work at all. There's a lot of losers. And when you live in a hyper-competitive society, when you know you cannot possibly compete, then why bother playing the game at all? Now, just one more. Modern people who devote themselves to self-improvement and personal excellence will always find out eventually they just can't do it. One day, you're too old to play the game. You no longer have the competitive edge. Your beauty fades. Your circumstances turn against you, or you just get bored. Now, sometimes those realizations come all at once, and we call it a midlife crisis, and sometimes it's just little by little. That's all the result of Genesis chapter 3. Eventually, we find out we're not God, and we're not self-sufficient. I mean, Genesis chapter 3 reveals this fundamental deep truth about our human nature, and that is we are all dependent upon something else. And on our own, the illusion of independence is a lie. The deception of self-sufficiency is a deception. We just can't do it. We were meant to be dependent upon another source. I think a lot of you know I'm a pretty avid bike rider, and you know I'm reasonably in shape. My leg muscles are reasonably strong. I can ride for quite a few miles. My cardiovascular is reasonably in good shape, although every year it seems it gets a little bit less in shape. But it doesn't matter how well my muscles and cardiovascular are in shape. They need to have fuel. And at some point, if you're not fueling your system right, they're going to wind up running out of energy. And so there was one ride, and every now and then it happens where I don't plan my water or my food enough, and I both dehydrate and I bonk. Okay, now that's probably a strange word for many of you. Let me just tell you, I did not say bong, all right? Bonk. Bonk means you hit the wall. Bonk means the glycogen stores are now depleted. Your muscles just literally cannot get the energy they need to function. And so when you're dehydrated, not enough water, and when you're bonking, not enough food for fuel, it doesn't matter what kind of shape, your body just shuts down. It can no longer function. You know, it hit me. In many ways, we are all spiritually dehydrated without the living water. In many ways, we're all spiritually bonking without the bread of life. That's what happens when we have run with the illusion of independence and the deceit of self-sufficiency. We realize at some point we're all bonking, we're all dehydrated. And so therefore, we then kick into our next mode. Well, once we realize that we are not able to be our source, then we wind up turning to, well, it's called idols. The search for idols. But by the way, the word idol is actually kind of a popular word these days because of American Idol. And yeah, it's a fun show, man. I've watched all kinds of little video clips from that on Instagram and YouTube. It's fun, you know. But, you know, the latest American Idol, who's going to be the next star, the next superstar, the next great success, the next amazing talent? And, you know, we want to applaud them and love them. But it's a fun show. But when the Bible talks about idols, it is never in a positive way. When the Bible talks about idols, it's actually kind of referring to alternative false god, because an idol in the Bible is whatever matters most for you. An idol is whatever has become supremely important for your life. An idol is where you find meaning, purpose, identity, and everything that you think you need to live. And once we are disconnected from God, and once we realize that we ourselves are not sufficient, we go running on an endless search for idols. Old gods, new gods, ancient gods, American gods, the gods that have been around forever, the gods of money, sex, power, and pleasure, tribal gods, political gods, national gods, party gods, those maybe more miscellaneous gods of entertainment, distraction, amusements, diversions. I mean, here's what has happened for all of our life. It's like we're on an endless search for gods, and there's a pantheon of them out there saying, hey, try me, I'm next. See what I can do for you. And so we do. And for a little bit, those idols, those alternative gods, they are fun, they're attractive, they're appealing, they energize us a bit, but only for a bit. Because then we discover there's a catch, and they're no longer energizing us. And in fact, now they're letting us down. They're not delivering. They're not coming through. They way overpromised and underdelivered, and we're disillusioned. Well, that's okay. We'll go try another god. And there's endless gods to try. And so we keep that search going for a long, long time. Now, in 1 Samuel chapter 12, we read this: do not turn away after useless idols. Why are they useless? Because they can do you no good. They cannot rescue you. Some verses say, or translations say, they cannot save you because they are useless. But there's something worse than letting us down. They do that, but there's something that's even worse. Before they let us down, they kind of remake us into their own image. Every now and then you hear us talk about at Living Word, you become what you love. You become what you worship. Well, that's what happens with any god, with any idol. It's like we start to become like whatever it is that matters the most to us. So let me read the words from another person. His book is actually called You Are What You Love. Very much shaped my thinking on this. A guy named James Smith. Here's what's at stake, he says, with these idols. Your very identity. Our fundamental allegiances, your core convictions and passions. He says right now, it is like a contest out there to get your heart. Everything out there wants your heart. Martin Luther, referring to the great reformer, whatever your heart clings to and confides in, that's really your God. John Calvin says the heart is an idol manufacturing factory. We become what we worship because we worship what it is we love. Now listen to this list of things he gives. There is no such thing as not worshiping. No such thing. Everybody worships. The only choice is, what are you going to worship? Well, pretty much anything you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you find real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. You'll never feel you have enough. If you worship your own body and beauty and sexuality, you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you in the ground. Worship power, wow. You will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to keep your fears at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, you'll end up feeling stupid, a fraud, a poser, and being found out. And the insidious things about all these things we worship is they're simply the default pattern of our heart. Now, that's the message of Genesis chapter 3. We have been disconnected from the source of life and love. And then Genesis says, when we tried the route of self-sufficiency, it doesn't work. And so now we run after all these idols, and they don't work. In fact, they make things worse. And so let's finish talking just a little bit about the love we have lost and finding it again. So here's where 1 John is just so brilliantly understanding of Genesis 3. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Boy, let me just stop there for a moment. If there's something that I'm deeply concerned about 21st century North American conservative Christianity, is we are less than we have ever been a people of love, and we are more than we have ever been a people of anger and hatred. And I tell you, there's nothing more telling than we have no longer worshiping the true God of life and love. There are some other idols out there that are remake us in their own angry, hateful, spiteful image. 1 John says, we know we have passed from death to life because we love each other. And anyone who doesn't love, like you're remaining in death. So in Genesis chapter 2, Adam and Eve were in love. Well, yeah, okay, they were in love with one another, but that's not what I'm talking about. They were living in the love of God. Acts chapter 17, in him we live and move and have our being. Okay, the one in whom we do that is God, who is love. So therefore, in God, we live in love, we move in love, we have our being in love. In Genesis chapter 2, I mean, everything about life was filled with love. Daily existence was love. Our nature of life was love. Purpose was love. Meaning was love. We were created in the image of God, who is love. We were created for love, by love, because of love, in love. I mean, it was love. And Genesis chapter 3, we lost our original love. And we've been looking for it ever since. On that horrible, terrible, no good, very bad, worst day ever. It was the worst day ever because we lost our original love. And in losing our first love, we have been running after other loves ever since, dying for love and dying to get it back. Now, let me just give you two words that are not common, but they're very important. And it is disordered love and inordinate love. You see, when we lost our original love, we have failed to love God rightly, we love ourselves wrongly, and we love our neighbors either poorly or not at all. By the way, that's part of the message of next week, what our loss of love has done to our relationships. I mean, we love poorly or not at all. But our love has become disordered and inordinate. So disordered love is basically this. It's a love that is misdirected, misguided. It's attached to the wrong thing. That's what it means to be disordered. Now, inordinate, that's an even less common word. It basically means something is excessive, unreasonable. It's not justified. It's not in proportion. It is exorbitant. So disordered love means we are loving the wrong things, and inordinate love means we are loving things wrongly. See, that's what happens when we have let go of our first love. Not only did we lose our first love, but we lost all the other loves. And the only way we get all of our other loves rightly ordered is by getting our first love reordered. I mean, every now and then we talk about, hey, keep the main thing the main thing. I could paraphrase that a little bit. Hey, let's keep the main love the main love. If you get your main love right, everything else is going to wind up falling in place. You get your main love wrong and no other love is going to wind up working for you. The greatest commandment is love the Lord God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Matthew, Mark, Luke, all three of them have versions of it. Every now and then, somebody says, man, like the Christian God seems just kind of narcissistic. I mean, why is God so concerned that he gets all this love and worship and adoration? I mean, is he that needy? Is he that narcissistic that he only thinks about himself, that he just wants everybody to love him most of all? And I just want to say nothing could be further from the truth. God does not tell us to love him above all because he's narcissistic. He tells us to love him above all because he knows he's the only true source of love, and that is what you need. And loving anything else will never work for you, and loving him is the only way. I mean, well, yes, we love God because he is worthy. Of course, we love God for his own sake. Years ago, we used to sing a chorus, he's altogether lovely, altogether worthy, wonderful to me. I mean, it's just who God is. Yes, God deserves love because of who he is. But we also love God for our sake. The very best thing you and I will ever do is stop loving ourselves so much, stop being so fixated, obsessed with, and absorbed with ourselves. Because when we want to say, okay, self is the source, self is the main thing. And just like we try to pick ourselves up by our shoestrings, that doesn't work. Well, you can't pick yourself up by your own love because you just can't do it. And turn to God. And when we turn to God, when we reconnect with God, the source of life and love, once again, love begins to flow freely into our lives. And as love with God is being reordered, we begin to love ourselves properly and we begin to love others wonderfully. But it has to start with getting the first main love reordered. That's what Jesus Christ came to do for the reordering of love. Well, let me refer you to C.S. Lewis. And I think some of these words you may have heard us use before. And Lewis just took them straight from Jesus. But let me tell you Lewis first. So from Mere Christianity, pretty strong words. Give up yourself and you will find your real self. Lose your life and you will save it. Submit to death, the death of your ambitions and favorite wishes every day. And the death of your whole body in the end. Submit with every fiber of being and you will find eternal life. Keep back nothing. Nothing that you have not given away will ever really be yours. Isn't that fascinating? I mean, when we don't give things away, they're not really ours. Nothing in you that has not died will ever be raised from the dead. I mean, that's the message of over and over of Paul, like just die so it can be raised to life. And when we try to hold on to it, and we won't, it can't be raised to life. Look for yourself and you will find in the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look for Christ and you will find him, and with him, everything else thrown in it. I mean, that was the lie that Adam and Eve listened to. They had everything because they had God. And they'll say, maybe you don't have everything, so let's just stop believing in God and then you can have everything. And that's what they did, and they lost it all. Jesus says, whoever finds their life, this is in Matthew chapter 10, whoever finds their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Because we're reconnecting with love. And then in chapter 16, whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. And what good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, to run after every single idol that you could ever possibly find, and yet forfeit your soul? The beauty is this. When we love God first, reordered love, you find life. And the more we love God, the more fully human and fully alive we become. The more we live in the love of God, the more his love makes us real. Bob Dylan was so right. You got to serve somebody. You got to love somebody. You got to worship somebody. Would you bow with me for a word of prayer? I know that there's some of you sitting here and probably more online that you're feeling this. And for some of you, you're feeling it because you have never had that love reordered in the first place. You feel like you're missing God. And today is a great time for you to trust and have allegiance, belief, and commitment. And just say to Jesus, I'm going to choose to believe you today. I'm going to receive you today. I want to have reconnection today with you. And I pray for your love and life to begin to flow into mine. And I'm just going to turn away from that self. I'm going to turn away from all those other yucky gods I've been trying to use. And Lord, I just want you. And even if you don't know exactly what those words might mean or what they might do, something very, very powerful and transformative is happening. We'd love to talk to you about that. You know, for all of us, we live in a world that is constantly competing for our heart. On Sundays, perhaps we have more clarity that God is the one who has our heart. Let's just enjoy a time of worship, love, and serving Him.
Hey there! Thanks for watching Living Word Community Church's YouTube channel. You can click to watch our most recent message and hit the subscribe button so you never miss a video or a live stream. We look forward to seeing you soon.